Well, hello, everybody. Welcome back to this running podcast. I'm Dr. Fuentes. I'm your host for this running podcast. This is going to be the first episode for 2025, and I'm excited about it. I think it's going to be an important topic of discussion. I have an amazing guest with me today, and let's get started. Today we're going to be talking about the impact of exercise in preventing cardiovascular disorders. Cardiovascular diseases, including coronary artery disease and stroke, are the leading cause of death around the world. According to the American Heart Association, in 2024, in the US alone, around 1,105 deaths are occurring per day. Coronary artery disease, which is the most common type of CVD, produced around 40% of heart-related deaths in 1 year, and stroke around 446 deaths per day. That's per day. So that's about 610,000 deaths per year. The risk factors we all know for heart diseases, including our diet, hyperlipidemia, high fats, right? High LDLs, smoking, having a sedentary life, and of course, having or no activity, no physical activity. And this is where exercise plays an important factor. According to this article by Dr. Samuel Montalvo, exercise is one of the best still modalities to prevent cardiovascular disease and stroke. I'm very happy to have Dr. Samuel Montalvo. He's a clinical exercise physiologist and sports biomechanist from Stanford University. So let me tell you a little bit about his educational background. I'm so happy to meet Samuel because he's one of our own from UTEP. So I have that luxury and that pleasure to know Samuel back those years. So he has a Bachelor of Science from UTEP, a Master of Science in UTEP from the Department of Kinesiology. Back then, for his master's, he focused on clinical exercise physiology. Later on, he moved on with his PhD in interdisciplinary health sciences, where I met him, with the focus on strength and conditioning. He graduated in 2021. On that year, in 2021, he was the recipient of the Stanford Prison Program, which promotes inclusion and diversity among postdoctoral scholars. And that's when he left us for Stanford, right, Samuel? In 2022, he continued with a postdoc fellowship at Woodside Human Performance Alliance. And in 2024, he was the recipient of recognition for scientific research in applied sports sciences by the Mexican Federation of Applied Sports Sciences, the FEMECAT, which we call, and the Mexican Sports Confederation. He's currently a postdoc of cardiovascular medicine at Stanford. I know he's part of the Olympic team, right, of Wushu. So he's an amazing human being. He's an amazing physiologist. He's an expert on so many topics on exercise physiologists and cardiovascular medicine. So welcome, Samuel. How are you?
Great. Thank you for inviting me again, Maria, and good to see you after a few years.
A few years, just a few years, Samuel. Let's not make it too much. So I know you're blooming. I'm so proud to see you, Samuel. I know you went to Stanford, and since there I see you publishing over and over so much. You're one of those classmates, I guess, that I get to see. You're blooming. You're doing so well in research, and you continue to grow. So I'm very proud of you, and so proud to see you. Like doing so well over there in Stanford. I'm proud of you.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, so let's get into the topic. I know you're a clinical exercise physiologist and in cardiovascular medicine, and this podcast is about running. So, obviously, we want to focus on exercise. So, I was reading one of your articles, and you were talking about how the problem of stroke and cardiovascular disease, if we go ahead and start narrowing down and get to the physiological or pathophysiological problem of cardiovascular diseases, you point to endothelial dysfunction being 90% of all the cause of all cardiovascular diseases. So, what is this endothelial dysfunction, and why is this like such a big problem for this?
Yeah. I guess just looking at it from a high level, right? Cardiovascular disease is just like a big category of several diseases, right? One of them being like heart disease, heart failure. We got a stroke. We got some blood vessel disorders, and then obviously the one of the most important ones, at least from the one I was looking, it was like stroke, right? And then with stroke, we have like at least two major strokes: ischemic, which is like blockage of the blood flow going through the brain, or we have hemorrhagic stroke, right, which is like the burst of a blood vessel, right? So there's several. Hence, because it's mainly through the blood flow, we wanted to focus on the vessels, right? So we want to look into the endothelial shear stress. And shear stress is just like the frictional force that goes through the vessel. And then there's some basic computational methods to estimate the blood flow going through the vessel. As you may know, the vessel is not like a perfect cylinder, right? It's not like it's flat. It has like obviously little bumps and little deformities across the vessel. But it's also like without exercise and poor diet and not good lifestyle habits, like platelets of blood might be building off in there, or maybe some other type of blockage could be appearing, which is going to be mostly your arteriosclerosis, right? So basically, through exercise, right movement, human movement, look, good eating habits, you want to prevent that from forming. You want to prevent arteriosclerosis from forming. So one of the articles that we published actually from UTEP, we wanted to look into different exercise modalities, right? Um, Historically, we know that endurance exercise, whether it's like on a treadmill or on a bicycle, is good for your heart overall, right? Like there's like a lot of evidence for that. But there's also been the resistance training, right? People like to go to the gym and I don't know, just do squats, right, or do bench press or whatnot. Um, those typically people don't see that there might be any cardiovascular effect from just performing those resistance exercise. So we wanted to test like the idea of is that actually true, right? So for that project, we did six different exercise modalities. So we did the treadmill, we did a cycle ergometer, arm ergometer. We also did squat, bench press, and bicep curls. So three resistance exercises, three endurance exercises, and then we tested like different time periods, right, and intensities. What we found is the common uh, knowledge, if you will, of endurance being the best. It is true, right? We found like if you run on a treadmill, that produces a lot of endothelial shield stress, right? So there's like a lot of blood flow going through your vessels, which is good for the overall health. But also, like if you perform squats or bench press, there's still like some effect, right? So the effect is not zero. But it's like there's some, probably not to the best of like just endurance exercise overall, but there's still some good effects. So our conclusion is that, well, at least from this preliminary data, because we can't, since we didn't have like a large longitudinal studies, we can do like causal inference, but at least we build a hypothesis that maybe even if you perform only resistance exercise, you might improve your overall cardiovascular health because we see greater blood flow and greater endothelial shear stress. But then again, the treadmill running seems to be like the king. And I guess this is good news for your podcast because like people here like running,
Of
right?
course, and we want
Um,
those extra points for us, right? So,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
and I know you were talking about the endothelial shear stress. So if I go back and take it by step, right? You mentioned this endothelial shear stress, which is that frictional force between that blood flow and that endothelium, right? That layer that we have, that single layer that we have on our blood vessels, right? And as I was like, if I understood correctly, the more blood flow, or I guess friction and movement through the vessels, it's healthier, right? So I'm assuming that I guess the most, like you're saying, aerobic or endurance exercises, right, is going to promote that because it helps to release this nitric oxide from the endothelial cells, right? And as if I could recall from back from my medical school, right, nitric oxide was good and it had like a vasodilatory effect, right? And so by having that vasodilation in, I guess, the contrast with vasoconstriction, right? Especially if you have that hyperlipidemia of that formation of flakes, right, in your endothelium, it will produce that. I guess it leads to that arteriosclerosis, right, which will be the hardening of our blood vessels, right? So, is that good so far?
Yeah, so I guess just to clarify, from that
Yeah.
project that we did, a follow up we did. Well, actually, I was just barely part of the initial process, but some friends and colleagues took that process a little bit further ahead, and they actually looked into enos, right? So they did
Okay.
cell culture and they looked into enos because like that's for your endothelial nitric acid, and obviously they tested like on like they use like this very sophisticated like electrical pumps to simulate exercise in more in vitro scenario, and they observe like yes, I mean it does improve your the overall expression of enos, right? Which is
Okay.
it kind of yeah, it supports just what you taught us right now, right? Like what you learn from medical schools is like back to from like
Yeah, that got
little
my that little thing just got my attention. Like,
yes,
well,
yes.
that pretty much it's kind of like the cascade of things of leading to so much problem in like
Yeah, so
cardiovascular
at least
system.
in our study, we couldn't do that more of a mechanistic approach, simply because we couldn't like like go through like with like get like a cell line from like the vessels within doing exercise and stuff like that. So like yeah, we show the endothelial shear stress increase, right? But we didn't show like the whole mechanism behind it,
Mechanism
right?
of behind it.
Yeah, so there's always like with those like in vivo studies, there's always like this pros and cons, right? So for example, like what my friend did with the cell culture, right? I mean, it's like a very controlled environment, and you can say like, oh yeah, intensity, exercise intensity, or electrical intensity, if you will, increases enos. But yeah, I mean, but how does this actually translate when we do like the squat versus like the sprint, right? So like yeah, everything in research has like pros and cons, has limitations. But I
Yeah,
mean,
of
what
course.
you present is a theoretical hypothesis or background that supports what we did. I mean, yeah, everything's
Okay.
connected, so it's good.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
And when we're talking about endurance training, because you're saying that endurance improves these ESS, right? So when we're talking about endurance, like on the treadmill, or is there differences when we're talking about the treadmill or cycling? Are there like any differences when it comes to any type of
Yeah, yeah,
exercise?
yeah. Yeah, so when I got here to Stanford, I was very blessed. So my primary mentor, his name is Matthew Wheeler. He's also like a cardiologist. Um, he connected me with two legends, also like of exercise physiology. So several of them. One of them is like John Myers, and then his collaborator and also like one of my mentors, Victor Fredischer. They did like back then the 90s or the 80s. They tested like a bunch of like different um, exercise protocols to like estimate VO2 max. So like probably like in the majority, still like people do it to this day. Cardiologists still use like the Bruce test protocol for whenever you do a VO2 max test, which is
What
like
is it?
every three. So if you're on a treadmill,
Hmm.
right, you got connected your metabolic card. So every 3 minutes or every 2 minutes, I'm probably forgetting this. You increase intensity, right? And then you increase also like the grade, so the incline of the treadmill. So you hope that by increasing one the speed and the incline of the treadmill, like people will get to like fatigue state, and then they just can't continue anymore. So that's where you stop your VO2 max or your cardiopulmonary exercise test. Yeah, so John and Victor, they did these studies like way back in the 90s and the 80s to test which protocols for testing VO2 max or your cardiopulmonary exercise test is the best. And they found like the ramp protocol on a treadmill seems to be the best. And the ramp protocol, basically what it is, it just increase either the speed every minute or you increase the incline every
Inclination.
minute. yeah, just either one of those, right? You can still do a little bit of mix depending on the equipment that you have. So, for example, when we were at UTEP, our treadmill would only go up to like 12 miles per hour. And for some athletes, we needed to like, we got to 12 minutes, 12 miles per hour, and then we had to like incline. But that was like a limitation from our equipment, right? Before that, I think we broke down a speed treadmill. Hopefully, no one from UTEP has seen this. With a speed treadmill, we could let athletes go all the way to like 16 or 18 miles per hour until like they just, uh, we have a harness so they could just like freely like they just could just like drop out, right? So yeah, so and then so going back to like what you asked, so that there were some follow-up studies where they actually tested how much is the difference between um, treadmill versus bicycle and then versus like arm ergometer, because some clinical populations will still do like arm ergometer, um, like a VO2 max test, and the difference is substantial. Treadmill seems to elicit the highest levels of VO2 max, then treadmill, and then arm ergometer. Some of the hypothesis or I guess conclusions of that is like the muscle mass, right? Treadmill utilizes more muscle mass versus if you're on a cycle ergometer, it's mostly going to be on the legs. Obviously, the mitochondria is like all over the place, right? But still on the muscular efficiency and what's being utilized varies, right? Obviously, and you would expect because the arms have less muscle mass, and that's all the way to the bottom, right? It also like running seems to be more of a normal human movement for everyone versus cycling is like not so common, right?
Okay.
So I've done all of them, and when I did cycling, my rectus, my quads were just like
Hmm.
burning, and I gave up because simply because I didn't want to do a cycle. Same with the arm ergometer. It's very difficult because you start doing this, and then you want to overcompensate, and then you start turning your body.
I
So it
feel like
has
that
like
one sounds like to be hard, to be honest.
yeah. So that one is also like super hard, especially with at least we encounter that with females was even less reliable because I mean there's less muscle mass. But yeah, I mean I think treadmill seems to be the best
Like the best way
for
to get there.
general and healthy populations, right, and athletes. But now when we move towards clinical populations, then there's also like safety concerns, right? So let's say you have someone with a cardiovascular problem or maybe some issue that you want to monitor, then you put them on a cycle, right? Because you might want to keep the ECG intact, or you want to have the person a little more secure. Uh, or if they're cyclists, right? If they're cyclists, they just
Yeah, of
want to jump
course.
into cycle ergometer. So yeah, treadmill to me seems to be the best,
Definitely
unless
the way to go.
yeah. Well, I mean the whole idea of the cardiopulmonary assessment test with the
Yeah.
VO2 max is to get them to exhaustion, right? That's as long as you're able to do that. But there's
And,
also like a lot of controversy of what actually like a maximal test is, right? Because sometimes you can use what is called like an RER, so respiratory exchange ratio,
mhm.
and that's typically just a VCO2 divided by VO2.
Okay.
So carbon dioxide divided by oxygen consumption, right? And then you get a ratio. And if it goes higher than commonly people historically use like 1.1, but there's been some debate that 1.0 indicates that you did a maximal test. And then there's other parameters like people like RPE, right? So like the person says like I'm done, then probably he's done or she's done, right? And then some other QC type of things that you can do. So I mean, VO2 max test is slightly complex. As unfortunately, it's not as easy as we think it might be, right?
And talking about VO2 max, because here, like in running, like runners were like obsessed with our VO2 max. Can you tell us, like, I guess, can you explain to our listeners what is VO2 max, like in simple terms, and like, is it useful for us to get tested for a VO2 max test?
Yeah. So there's two venues, I guess. One is for like athletes, and one is just for like general populations, right? So VO2 max is your maximal ability to consume oxygen, right, during exercise. So normal ranges for the majority of the population is going to fall between 20 and 50 something, 55 milliliters by kilograms by minute. So that's important to know the equation, right? Because we have milliliters. So how much oxygen divided by kilograms for each minute. Um, so that's a way to normalize across populations, right? Because obviously you're either taller or shorter than me, and I'm like either bigger or smaller than you. So the body differences might impact the your VO2 max, right? Um, so that's important to know the equation, right? Um, so so yeah, that's VO2 max, and VO2 max has been associated with performance, right? Obviously, elite athletes tend to have a higher VO2 max. So for most male athletes, it tends to be higher than 60 milliliters by kilograms by minute.
Are we talking
Females a
about
little bit
elite,
lower.
like
Yeah,
professional
elite
runners, or
athletes
okay?
like 50, 52. Obviously, is impacted by VO2 max. Have several factors that may impact VO2 max. So one of them, obviously, the strongest one is going to be sex, right? Sex is going to divide. It's going to stratify VO2 max very well. Well, VO2 max is going to stratify the sexes very well. The second one is going to be age. Unfortunately, across age, it decreases. Although there's been some controversy about the slope or how well it decreases, because people before thought like people would peak a certain age, but then has been moving.
I
The
read
whole
somewhere
yeah,
that, I'm sorry for the interruption. I read
yeah,
somewhere that we start to lose per decade, which is like about 10 of the of like a VO2 max number. That's like 1% per year, like in average. Is that correct?
um,
That seems pretty high. And I know like VO2 max is also associated with like your I was saying I was gonna say
longevity.
mortality. Yeah, longevity. Yeah, that's correct,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Which makes sense.
yeah. I mean, to some extent, we don't know how much on average it decreases across time, simply because we don't have that data. And some people have collected some data. So, for example, there's some case studies of like elite cyclists and marathon runners. And one of these schools from Ball State, they have done like some studies with that, and Florida State, I think. There's some other laboratories in Europe that have done these studies, right? But they're like mostly like very low sample size and like one or two world class athletes. So we don't know if how much of that average will hold true with the normal population. So it might be like you only decrease maybe five per year or two. I mean, we know the age effect exists, but we don't know about how much, to be honest. So I mean, it could be yes, but it could also be like maybe it's not. It doesn't decrease that much. Um, but yeah, I mean, unfortunately, yeah, it decreases with age. So
So I know VO2 max, and when like some people ask me, I think it's like talking about car engines. So just to
yeah,
make like an analogy, right? It's like having like a B4 versus like a sports cars, right? That have like a big engine and it's just gonna help you with better performance, and you're gonna have like a faster car. Maybe a small one is gonna have like a low engine, a B4, but hey, maybe it's gonna take you for a long ride, right? So
yeah.
and I know, I think in the bad news about VO2 max is that like it's in our genes. So we're born with, with a specific like ability of having that. On the good side, on the good news is that we can improve it, right? We can develop, we can improve that mitochondrial density, of course, that ability to break down substrates and produce energy and so on, right? At different rates. And I guess for runners, that's why like it's so important, or like they get hooked on this number, right? Because we tend to divide our running zones and our training according to the different I guess zones and levels, so we can train based on that. So how can we improve that VO2 max, Samuel? Are there like ways? I know we practice like practicing on different zones, and I'm so sorry for like taking back to this question. I was listening yesterday to a podcast. They were talking about, because I know there's like a lot of information that the way to improve your VO2 max is running in a low intensity of cardiovascular, right? Low heart rate. And that's where you can actually improve your mitochondrial density and your fat oxidation and so on. But I also like, they were also talking that the way to actually improve your VO2 max is on the high zone, like training on the high zone, like with high intensity interval sessions, and which you can actually start making our mitochondria fatter, right? Like more, not denser, but also like fatter, bigger, so they can be producing energy at the high intensity zones. So sometimes I hear these conversations, and to be honest, instead of like sometimes clarifying the information, I end up like getting more confused. So, so which is it? Like, what is the best way that we can improve our VO2 max? Are there
Yeah,
specific
so,
ways?
so I guess going back to your thought of VO2 max being like the car engine, I think it's a good analogy, right? So once you start seeing like high level athletes, so like after like certain VO2 max, doesn't really matter if you increase your VO2 max or not to win a race, right? Typically, what matters is your running technique or your running
True.
efficiency, right? That also has to do a lot of it, right? So your pacing, your breathing, right? Your mental focus. Like there's all these other extra parameters that are going to influence your running, right? It's just not unidimensional, right? It's like, oh, I'm just going to improve my VO2 max and magically I'm just going to win a bunch of races. I
True.
mean, you might, right? But
And I'm so
for
glad.
now,
I'm so glad you bring that up because we tend to say my performance, okay, this is my number. That means I can do this. But no, it's your training, your nutrition, your strategy, your pacing, your coaching, like your plan. So
right.
everything is gonna interfere. It's not only that number. And I'm glad that you brought that up. So going
Yeah,
back to that.
exactly. And I for sure know like runners are like very mental. They have developed a lot of mental toughness because like running is hard. But there's also some other like psychological strategies that people can have implemented. I mean, I'm not. That's probably not my area expertise, but I have seen like there's like a lot of athletes tend to have like a mental performance coach. So I do see like a lot of there's like a lot of deficiency on the athletes on that aspect, right? But then taking into consideration all this other um, factors that might influence your rate, right? So like again, you are you eating healthy? Are you sleeping well? I mean, those are like the basic ones. If you control for those basic ones, and then you're doing, I mean, it won't matter that much if you do like some two or some four, right? Um, at least at the beginning, right? So I think for me is make sure you have try to fix like the basic stuff before you jump into like more of a okay, so how much I do this, how much I do that, right? So at least at the beginning, right? Once you start getting a little more advanced, then you can start like you have everything fixed here, then you can start like looking at these other strategies. But moving on, I guess following with the car strategy, right? So like I mean car analogy. So we said the Ultimax is a car, the engine, right? And then technique might be like the overall car, right, or the driver, but also like how do we fix the car? How do we make it better, right? So that's gonna be come from your toolbox, right? I just came from Home Depot, so I guess that's where I'm getting my my
Okay.
analogies.
Yeah, of
So
course.
yeah. So right, so you have your zone two, right? That's gonna be one tool, right? Then you have your zone four running. You have your high intensity interval running. You have your slow days, right? Long distance running sessions, but you also have your plyometric, you have your resistance training, you might have your stretching recovery sessions, right? So you have like different tools to make you better, right? Not again, it's just like if you look at it just one dimensional, then you're losing all these other
The whole thing.
strategies
Yeah.
that you might be using, right? So like I know like popular wise is like zone two right now. Like everyone is jumping to zone
Yeah,
two,
of
which is
course.
great. But I mean, like if you do high intensity interval training, you might be able to do it for maybe 20, 30 minutes, right? Because it's tough.
Yeah.
Versus if you do some two, you're able to do more. So you have more volume, but less intensity, right? And the opposite is going to be true, right? High intensity is going to be higher, obviously high intensity. Sorry for redundancy, but it's going to be lower volume, right? You're not going to be able to do that every single day, right? Versus this zone two, you might be able to do it across time. So like things like with volume um, and intensity. But again, you have to do both. I do think you have to do both, and then you have to complement that with some other training strategies. Again, your stretching is going to be very important, right? Relaxing is going to be very important, like just mental focus meditation and whatnot. Resistance training, obviously, runners are not weightlifters and whatnot, right? We don't want them to do that because you don't want to get excessive muscle mass, but you want to get some like functional muscle mass. There's also like plyometric training and some other stuff because obviously you have repeated foot strikes, right? So you want to learn how to like absorb is not the correct mechanical term, but you want to be able to like make sure you attenuate those forces, right? So there's like it's super complex.
It's a whole
Um,
thing, yeah.
it's a whole thing. It's
It's
a whole world,
interesting.
right?
It's
But it's exciting,
amazing.
right?
Yeah, I feel so passionate about it. I love it. And then the more I read about it, I get more hooked on like trying to understand, like But I'm one of those persons that need to understand what happens on a molecular level or our cells to really understand why zone two or why high intensity intervals. Like the complement of each other. So for me to actually to make sense, right? And I know you were mentioning the importance of applying strength training. And I know that before, I don't know if it was the 70s, 80s, I think repetition of low weight was kind of like what was in back then. And I know right now the recommendation is more like low repetitions with high intensity for the recruitment of muscle fibers. Is that right? And I know you also like even I know you do also like mention on the article, right, that the importance of on these ESS and the importance of endurance exercises, which go back and circle back to the information, right, is that the importance of like this endurance training or the aerobic part is that the recruitment of these muscle fibers to improve that. I guess again that ESS at endothelial level, right?
Yeah. So I mean, for me, the purpose of strength conditioning or resistance training is to prevent overuse injuries, right?
Okay.
I mean, a lot of the injuries are going to happen if you run like a lot of, I mean, unfortunately, injury is going to be associated with how much you run, right? And you know this, like, if you're like been running for 5 years, you have injured at least once or
Yeah.
twice, right? Like, you will never encounter someone that has had not an injury, but unfortunately, that's like the dark side of a sport. But that happens with everything, right? Even when you get older, you might just walk and twist an ankle, right? It's just something that we can't minimize the risk of it, but we can't really prevent it, right? We can't prevent, we can just minimize the risk of that, likelihood of that happening. So resistance training is just one of those avenues, right? So again, when you're running, you're producing forces, right? When you're striking the ground to propel yourself forward, you're producing a force. So something like that you're doing with your resistance training, right? You just have a weight where you might squat or do lunges. So you're just producing, you're lifting a load, right? And you're producing forces like muscular force to lift the load. That's pretty much what it is, right? So the intensity, again, here the intensity is going to be the weight. So the intensity is going to be greater than when you run because when you're running, just like you're moving your own body, right? Here it might be a little bit higher, but it's going to be in a more controlled scenario. So it's kind of like if you think of your zone two, this is like zone zero type of exercise, right? It's like kind of like recovering, right? You're trying to still work out, but not overused, not the same movement again, which I mean tends to lead to injuries. And then the second part is back to your muscle fibers. So more repetitions tend to be more and lighter load might be associated with the usage of type 1 fibers,
Okay.
which are the ones that have more oxidative capacity. But you also need your type 2 fibers. And for those, you typically need a higher load, so more weight, less repetitions, because they fatigue faster. But you also have
Okay.
your hybrid fibers, which are somewhere in the middle. I guess also that those can be also just genetically, right? You might have, but it can also be influenced by training, right? So yeah, for that, I'll probably for the majority of people would be more on the moderate range, right? Somewhere about higher than 8 repetitions. Versus if you're like a sprinter, if you're spraying or you're like a gymnast or something, I'll probably bring down like way lower to the other side of the spectrum because you want to stimulate more the type 2 fibers, just more explosive
Okay. And a lot
type
of
of movement.
pilometrics, right?
Yeah, yeah, a lot of plyometrics as well. Up and then similar for runners, plyometrics could also be useful, right? Because running is also more like a plyometric work in a way, right? You gotta you used to that pace, that rhythm. But it has seemed to be very there's some evidence to that. Like it seems to be somewhat useful. Obviously, not you shouldn't have like a one big session of plyometrics, but it could be one or two exercises you can add into your session, right? So something like pogo jumps where you just like jump with the ankles, right? Maybe some lunges, some what is it, lunges hops, if you will, like just yeah, you just jump, right? It's pretty much what it is. It's like repeated jumps. Um, but yeah, there's like a lot to improve your exercise as you go, right? Obviously, the difficult part is like there's not like a plug-in and play. Like there's like here's a training plan for everyone. Just
Exactly,
here it is.
exactly. And this
Um,
is where I go back to like the importance of having like individualized coaching, because what works for me and it's not going to work for you. We're like so different. We have like so, I don't know, different abilities, different anatomy, biology maybe is the same thing, but genetics, everything. It's like some people are more injury prone, others not. Maybe others have like other more strength. I don't know, like different things, right? And I always like tell people, if you can, like, please get a coach, individualized coaching, so they can go ahead and focus like on and help you individual level, like with your performance, right?
right, right. I mean, there's a base, right? I think as long as so if you're already running and you're doing the right thing, right? I think you're doing great. And if you're already again taking care of those other extra factors like sleep well,
So,
right? Nutrition is good, right? Um, but then there's like a threshold, right? You want to get better, then that's where you start seeking help, right? But at least have like a basic standard exercise program. Then that's where I think the need of a coach might be needed. And again, like I said, like all these other tools, they're just like you have to experiment with those, right? Because there's like a bunch of a study whenever like we to get a study with high intensity interval training, like everyone just jumps
yeah,
into it,
right
right?
into it.
Because
Yes,
it's
exactly.
novel. But then you start looking at the numbers and the protocols, and it's like a sample size of 20 or 10, and you're like, oh, I don't know, that extrapolates to everyone, right? Um, so you have to be obviously you gotta trust science, but you gotta be skeptical. You gotta like actually go through it, right? Is it gonna apply to me? Maybe, maybe not, and then test it. I'm fan of like if you read a research article, like at least on exercise, right? You can't probably do this in some other domains, right? But in exercise, read the article, look at the sample size. Are they like you or not? Um, right? So if I look at one that's like they're like 15-year-old kids, right? It's probably not gonna apply to me. I'm like 38, right? So it's like probably
Yeah,
doesn't apply.
correct.
Um, but I'm
And I think
also a fan of test it, right? You can be your single subject design, right? Just go in, try it out, analyze it. Is it worth adding to your program? I mean, you're at the end, the person is the one that is gonna dictate whether they see improvement or they see an effect. Try it for a few times. If it's not worth it, then just move to the next tool. I mean, give it some time, obviously, and thought. I guess improvements don't happen overnight, right? You gotta test it out a few times, and then if it's not good, it's not good. If it's good, then just try to see where you add it, right?
yeah, that's true. And I know I love how you mentioned that, like when you're running, injury is gonna happen sooner or later, right? And I think it's part of being a runner. You have to learn how to navigate through the different injuries and also learn how to prevent them. If you already know that maybe you have, I don't know, you're prone to injuries, but you
Mhm.
know that strength, it has to be part of your routine along with just running, right? So it's all, I guess, part of it. And in the importance of recovery, right? Recovery is equally important to to training. There's like, you think that just maybe just resting, you're recovering, but actually a lot of things are happening in your cells at molecular level. There are a lot of these chemokines and a lot of these signaling is happening to patch up and to make sure that your all your muscle fibers are recovered and ready to start over with training again. So I always say recovery, please allow your body to recover. I'm not a fan of the running streaks. I don't know what you say about them as an exercise physiology. I think you need to allow your body to recover, but I don't know, like like I know a lot of people do running streak like nonstop, like they have to do like every single day. But is there any information on that?
No, I
No.
mean, I do think it has to do with one, personal preference, and then
Yeah.
two, the intensity and the volume that has been gathered throughout the week, right? Volume, intensity, and stress are just they can accumulate over time, right? But again, you can do stuff to like just minimize that stress, if you will. So like if you do, like, I'm very big fan of meditation, right? Like
Okay.
visual training and mental training. That could help. Like even stretching has been shown. Sauna, being on the sauna has helped. So for some people, like things like dancing, music, like some other stuff, like just get you a little more relaxed, has been shown to like help with the recovery. Obviously, not everything is the same to anyone, right? There's like those massage guns that people tend to use, and foam rollers and whatnot. Um, yeah, we probably jumping into like into like this big topic
I
of
know.
devices and
This
recovery.
umbrella,
Like,
yeah.
yeah, there's like a lot of them probably don't work. Some of them do work. Some of them do just do like a minimal thing, and sometimes it's like, is it worth your $300, $1,000 for like a minimum effect that you probably could get better just by sleeping better, right?
Having
I
a good
mean,
sleep, there's nothing like a
yeah,
good
yeah,
sleep, right?
yeah. I'm saying that because just obviously, yeah, yeah, yeah. So I
Yeah.
mean, recovery is like essential, right? You're like a lot of your, again, molecular adaptations, physiological adaptations are going to happen during your recovery, right? That's where you try to like recover, and then you create this super compensation effect, right? So we're like, when you like fully recover, you feel better and you perform better, right? So everything has to be connected. Again, um, not all training sessions are going to be like very intense. So like if they're super intense, then it might take you a little bit longer to recover.
To
If like a little
recover.
more higher volume, less intensity, so like some two, you could probably do some two like every day, right? But yeah, it also depends on the history, like training history of the person, then obviously the age and whatnot, right? So like, I do have some friends that they're like professional athletes, and all they do is like they just train.
Time we spend like our like, and this is for general people, I guess, in general, like not training for anything specific, but to stay healthy, have a healthy heart or a healthy life, maybe hopefully uh, maybe a longer life expectancy. Like when it comes to exercise, does it matter how many minutes a day do we practice exercise? Or
Yeah, yeah. Well, not per day, but per week. So again, I think I mentioned two of my mentors here, Victor and John Myers. Well, basically, John Myers like was the lead author for this paper. I don't. I think it was early 2000s or 1990s. It's like 30 years ago. Look at that.
almost
Um,
yesterday.
yeah, yeah, I was like yesterday.
Yesterday.
Um, so they look into VO2 max was a predictor of obviously longevity, mortality, right? These initially started showing up with males, um, and the recommendation was like metabolic equivalent task. So your METs, and then what they found is that if you perform at least some sort of like a moderate to vigorous intensity of exercise, at least 150 minutes a day, that decreases substantially your overall level of mortality risk, right? And this big paper became very popular. But then the second metric that they look at after, I don't know if it was there, but after that is what is called the VE by BCO2 slope, which is just, so VE is ventilation, and VCO2 is just carbon dioxide, right? So how much carbon dioxide you're expelling,
Hmm.
right? If you look at the slope, if you look like just like a linear line, how much it tilts is like your slope type of thing. Uh, if you look at that number, which you can only probably do this at a lab. So like if it goes below like 34, then your increase of mortality increases because you're not able to you're expelling like too much carbon dioxide pretty much, or your ventilatory efficiency is not as good as some other people. So there's these two metrics. So
Okay.
back to what you said is like it has to be at least 150 minutes per uh, per week. So that's like what about like three 30-minute sessions of moderating to vigorous intensity. So again, if you do zone two 3 times per week, I mean
Okay.
you're doing awesome, right? And some other articles have shown that uh, if you only walk, you still reduce your risk of mortality, right? But then again, it's maximized if it's increased to like this 150 minutes moderate area, right? But even for me, is like sometimes to tell people like, oh, you gotta do 150 minutes
That
for
sounds.
you guys runners is like it's easy, right? I
Let me
mean,
go.
you
I'll
already
go
do
back.
that.
I'll be right
Yeah,
back.
you got a bag in a session, you have a bag, you're good. But for people that super sedentary, um, like yeah, so it's like a lot. They're like they don't want to get up from the sofa. There's just like on the tablet or whatever. They're like, oh man, it's like don't want to go walk for a walk. I mean, at least I mean for a run, at least go out for a walk. I mean, take
Yeah.
your steps, right? So like I think it's being like 8,000 now.
Yeah.
Um, 8 to 10,000 steps per day seems to be also a good metric for mentality reducing again. But I think still VO2 max is the king in
Still.
terms of yeah. I mean, because there's more intensity when you test for that, right? There's more, yeah. There's just it's a little bit different for sure.
And I know we all carry our watches, right? To have like that idea of that number, but are they accurate when it comes to give us those numbers? I know they're like very close to it, but if you want to really get precise, you need to go and get the test on the treadmill. But are they close enough to give us a good idea of how we're doing? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean the algorithms have been getting better. So for the most part, yes, it seems to be from what I have read online and probably not a formal study because they're like they're brands and they have like this close algorithms like no one has access to it other than that because there's like it's a company, but like Garmin tends to be very accurate over the Apple Watch at least from what I heard in athletes, a lot of people have reported that might underestimate a little bit. I
Hmm.
don't know how much it varies across people, right? I know mine tends to be a little bit underestimated because I've tested like myself and then like at the actual facility. But I've heard for some people have been overestimated. So I mean, but for the majority of like sedentary people, seems to be about right. So I'll
Okay.
say probably like for normal people, won't matter which one. It's going to give you a close estimate.
Okay.
For athletes, then at least from what I heard, I don't know if the new models have changed, but it looks like the majority like the Garmin better, simply because it's been designed for like runners and cyclists, versus the Apple Watch has been mostly designed for like general usage, not necessarily in mind for like athletes. So I guess this is like not a Garmin commercial, right? If you don't want to sponsor the podcast, they can do so. I'm just
Yeah,
kidding.
of course.
Uh, but yeah, at least to some extent they are accurate. But again, it's just like any other prediction models, they're gonna have some error to it, right? We just gotta be conscious of. It's like it's not gonna be your 100% value. And even if you go to a facility, then it's also like it's not gonna be 100% true value because there's like some other sources of error to it. And so I mean, it just it's complicated too. If you care about like the full truth of what a value is,
Yeah.
then it gets a little more complicated. But I think it's a good tool to track, right, for the day to day. If you have it on your watch, then it gives you like some, um, and maybe they will take one or two university classes and then they're good to go, right? Versus like if you're like a working professional, then that gets a little more difficult, right? And then if you have a family, then that becomes a little more difficult, right? Because you have like
They're more
all this other
complicated.
stuff, and yeah, it gets a little more complicated.
And training
But
becomes
yeah,
like a full-time job, like honestly, because you have to consider like all of these factors, and it seriously looks like a full-time job. Like when you're training, especially like something, an event like a marathon, it just become like the whole thing. You have to
yeah,
plan
yeah,
for everything from your sleep to your nutrition to your diet to your training hours to your, and your, I think your family comes like last in the line of it. So it just become like so hard to carry on everything. Have you had a chance to see like in your, I don't know, as part of your research, the running forms? Does one running from your type of food strike or that, does that impact performance? Does that?
I have seen some computational simulations, but I can't recall what the findings were for those. But in terms of form, I've seen some studies. I forgot the name of this, but it's like more on the pacing and the type of breathing that is being done, and it has shown like obviously you might know because you're a runner, but like elite athletes tend to have like really good pacing, right? And it's like good control or like the breathing mechanics. Um, and then there's like a certain rhythm that they run to, right? Versus like not very like people that don't run as much as like I do, right? So like probably my rhythm might be like way off all over the place. So um, yeah, I can't recall the overall name for this effect. I don't know if it's like has to do something with your systolic and diastolic blood pressure, right? So you want a foot strike whenever it has to be someone's sync compete with those two. But yeah, it's been a while since I read that paper. But
Yeah,
I've seen a little bit of that. Yeah, yeah.
and I know one of the techniques is like when you try to like control your heart rate, is just try to like you're running, try to take like two big breaths inside, like take one and then hold it and try to take like another on top of it, so you can pretty much have like that impact on your heart rate and it slows down. I try to do it sometimes, but it's hard because I mean you're here like dying and you have to take like two deep breaths, but actually it kind of like works. I'm like it helps you to try to control. So if you work on your breathing, which is really hard, it helps to learn how to control that heart rate. I know there's also like another technique that one has a name. I don't know. It's like high reading. It had like chai reading. I don't know the name of it. Like to be honest, I forgot. But it's like three breaths and two 3% in, two out. 3% two out, like as you're running. So it's kind of like another way of to control that heart rate. I haven't tried that one, but maybe I should. All right, and I
Yeah, I mean, but
know
again, they're all breathing strategies,
breathing
right?
strategies.
At the end,
Yeah,
again, you just gotta find something that's giving you the best value for your buck, right? So, like, if you're trying this running breathing strategy, right, um, and it feels like it's just like very difficult to maintain, you might be wasting like a lot of energy just like doing that, right? You
yeah,
gotta
doing that.
find what works, right? Yeah, yeah. Yeah. So a
Yeah,
lot of
maybe you're
experiment.
on zone two, zone three. You can like practice it, and
Yeah,
actually it becomes like very, I guess, a mindful practice, like trying to focus on that rhythm pattern, which it helps, but it helps you like kind of to have that mindfulness and be present
right, right,
on your
right.
run, right? Rather than be distracted for other things. And I know you do wushu, right? Is that how is it
Yeah,
called?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I know you went to the Olympics, right? Or can you?
No, I've been to like
No?
several more multinational events. So like
Okay.
wushu is like Chinese martial arts.
Okay.
I was in 2013. It's called the World Games. Is sanctioned by the Olympic Committee, but it was open to like a bigger audience of sports. So I think yeah, it was like Olympics B type of thing. So not the Olympics, but like
Okay.
the multi sport center that was before that, below that, and I went to like there was one called the World Combat Games, which it was like just like it was kind of like the Olympics for martial arts, and I think
Okay.
the Olympic Committee only did two editions of that. That was 2013 and 2015. So that one is like it was pretty cool because it was like 20 different martial arts, and it was like people from MMA, judo, taekwondo, and then so wushu was like kung fu. So we
Okay.
had that, and I mean I've been involved with a lot of athletes and even with Muay Thai and kickboxing too. Um,
And
so
how do
yeah,
you
my
handle that?
background is martial arts. Huh?
How do you manage your training with all the thousand papers that you're doing, and how are you able to have that balance of training and your
So
professional life?
fortunately, so all my studies when I did my master's and bachelor's was more like being in the lab, right, collecting data. Same with the PhD, but it was like at least initially more exercise physiology, then more strength and conditioning, like people throwing our weights and sprinting and jumping. So it was like more explosive. And then after that, I went back to cardiovascular physiology, if you will, in exercise. And when I moved to Stanford, everything became a little more computational because everything here they have like big databases for everything, right? Which is awesome. So I mean, has pros and cons. I mean, the con is like obviously I'm not there with people, but the pro is that I have a database. I have huge database of people like runners, wearables. We have things with VO2 max, right? We have like just right now is going over like an ECG database that has like 10,000 athletes, right? So ECGs, you have your electrodes, you have like a lot of signals, right? Which is
So
pretty
pretty much
cool.
you can take a look at any
I can look at
factor
yeah,
that you
yeah.
want to analyze. Sounds pretty fun to me.
So I can go to the gym. I can go to the gym at any time when I want, right? But I come back and I do work, and obviously
Okay.
sometimes I have to go to school and whatnot. But I mean, I'm being somewhat blessed to like this postdoc time period that I can be a little more flexible. Obviously, it's gonna come to when maybe like in a year and a half or two, then I'll probably be in a more isolated 8 to 5 type of work. But I've been blessed that right now things have been a little more computational, if you will. So
And
yeah,
you're good with that. I remember you're good with that. So
so
that's pretty
kind
cool.
of be like computational exercise physiologist or something like
Yeah.
that.
A little bit of everything.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. All right, Samuel. So I guess going back to the introduction to the beginning of the podcast. So exercise to reduce the risk of cardiovascular diseases. Does it matter how many days a week? How much?
Reliability metric, right? Keep it.
Okay.
Look at it. What you're doing throughout the day, right? You look at your heart rate variability. You look at your VO2 max numbers. Look at your sleep, nutrition, right?
Yeah.
Everything is going to be somewhat connected, right?
Yeah, of course. All right. Any other research, Samuel, that you want to share with our listeners that you're doing?
Yeah, I can share this. It's gonna be a small, what is it like a little self advertisement here in a way. Not really self because it's like we're like a big group. So I mainly work with the MotoPAC, which is a molecular transducers of physical activity consortium. This is like a large NIH program looking to create a map of the benefit, like a molecular map of the benefits of exercise to like endurance exercise and resistance exercise. Um, and then we have like, so for example, like people would do like an acute bout of exercise training. So like they'll do on a bicycle 40 minutes of, I don't know, 60% of VO2 max. And then they get samples, like they get blood, muscle, and adipose tissue like before exercise,
Hmm.
then blood during exercise, and then they get like again blood, muscle, and adipose like right after exercise, 3 hours, 3.5 hours after, and then 24 hours after. So we wanted to know how this changes, like so, like which molecules, like proteins, metabolites, transcriptomics, epigenomics, might be associated with like with VO2 max, but also like how do they differ across the different time points, right? And throughout the exercise and after the exercise. But then after that, they jump into like a 12-week exercise program, and then they repeat this acute exercise bout. So we wanted to like, is it the same when they're like with no training at all versus like 12 weeks of training? Are the responses about the same, right? And then we have like highly active people like you guys. They come and do the same exercise, acute bout, and then we compare that across the different populations, right? And we also have like a pediatric population that do like something similar, but you only get blood samples for them because it's hard like
Okay.
to poke
Yeah,
it,
tour. Yeah.
right? But yeah, so that's like the biggest project that we have. It's still exercise physiology in a way, but it goes into like this high dimensional data, right? So because we try to map the whole body, right? What our responses like at the molecular level, and then we still have some physiological, biomechanical data that we use for this study. So it's like a huge
Sounds
database.
exciting.
Yeah, it's like
Sounds
a
so
never
exciting.
ending, like a never ending project. I think at some point last year we had a meeting and they were like talking about all these projects, like multiple papers, ideas, and it was like at least 10 to 15 years of project ideas that we have. So I'm just trying to like stay on with this very smart people, right? And I'll be learning a lot. We have experts in exercise physiology, so like people from Ball State. We have people from Pennington, LSU. We have Advent Health. We have very like amazing exercise physiologists, but we also have like very good people with computational background.
Uh,
Like they do this like deep learning, machine learning, right, statistical modeling. We have people from like the chemical sides. So like if you want to do like proteomics. I don't know if you remember for UTEP. If you want to do proteomics or phosphoproteomics, you want to do like a mass spectrometry, right? And we knew like if you do a mass spec, is like one is like super expensive, right?
yeah.
And two is like difficult to run. So I mean, fortunate like one, some other person is doing it for me, and then two, I just get the data. Obviously, we have to like QC and whatnot, right? Um, but yeah, I mean, it's an exciting project. Some papers already came out, but it was mostly with the rat, like just mice data. Um, but yeah, hopefully once those papers come out at the end of the year, I can share with you guys and
Yeah,
be like,
please,
hey,
please, please share so we can take a look and see maybe like if we're still like, are there any differences that are happening, like at physiological level when we're going through these different zones, or like what's happening with fat oxidation? What does it turn to more like glycolytic? And that sounds exciting. So
yeah, definitely,
pretty cool.
definitely, yeah.
So yeah, please share. And right now, if you have anything on the podcast, I put this on Spotify and YouTube. If you have any links to, I'm gonna post obviously your to your webpage and some of your articles. But if you have anything else, I'll go ahead and post a link. So if anybody wants to take a, read a little bit further into your research and what you're doing, I'll go ahead and to include those links on those sites so they can go ahead and take a look. At your job and your research. All right, guys. So any last things that you want to share with us? Takeaways,
No,
exercise,
I
stay
mean, other than
active.
that, thank you for the invite. Stay active, eat healthy. I think those are like the two most important things that because they're so easy to do, like we tend to forget about it. And we know like the ACSM, the American College of Sports Medicine, says like exercise is medicine, right? And there's like a lot of data out there that shows that. I mean, if only you exercise, right? It doesn't. I get it. You can get into the complexity of like, do I do plyos or do like sprints or whatever, right? But at the end, it's like just move,
Stay
right?
active, move.
Stay
Like put the
active. That's
phone
gonna
down or
improve your
take it with you, but stay active, right? You know, to
exactly,
my
exactly.
to my students, I even have them as an extra credit to go like log your miles or go run a 5K or something, like something just to get them moving because they're always like on their phone, like a social media and their phone. We're all in social media, but they're always like there. Nobody like those like see that doing exercise. So it's one way kind of like to get them active, stimulated a little bit with that extra credit. So So you hear from the experts. So make sure to stay active. Some for walking, running, strength conditioning, yoga, whatever. Just make sure to get those numbers in. Stay active for your body, and make sure to. It will help you also like to prevent that any type of cardiovascular disease. Right.
That's correct. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, guys. This was a great podcast. If you have any questions, feel free to send me a message. Go ahead and comment. So, if you're interested in any other topic, let me know so I can make sure to have the right guests for you and answer those questions for you. We're all here learning together from each other. So, thank you. Good luck. Thank you so much, Samuel. You're the best. I keep looking forward to what else you're doing. Please send those papers this way so I can share them and make sure to continue following your work. All right.
Thank you once again.
See you guys.